Canada has this reputation that it took forward the anti-landmine treaty. Canada is the good guy when it comes to preventing this abhorrent situation where landmines are used. But I'm contending that landmines were used at Gustafsen Lake. And even as Canada was starting up its international campaign, the anti-landmine treaty, leading to the anti-landmine treaty, landmines were being planted by the Canadian military in British Columbia. And Ujjal Dosanjh, the Attorney General, had to have signed off on this, which was, in a sense, the go-between between the government of Canada and the government of British Columbia. You've got to realize in disputes that there are different sides to the story. So why did the media not do its job and try to get the other side of the story? And I think that's what this film that you're about to see is really has at its heart, at its essence.
It is my humble view, this is clearly a law enforcement issue. This is a matter of law enforcement at the hands of the RCMP.
Guys running around with guns aren't going to be tolerated, period. I mean, they're not going to queue jump, they're not going to use guns, they're not going to shoot at ranchers. That's bottom line.
I think the RCMP unquestionably should back off and should agree with submitting the legal question of jurisdiction to the appropriate constitutional tribunal for resolution in accordance with the rule of law.
It will not be tolerated if anyone picks up weapons and starts shooting at police officers. It's not part of the Aboriginal rights to pick up AK-47s and start shooting at police officers.
We have two responsibilities as Indian people. We have the responsibility to defend the land, and we have the responsibility to defend the people that live on the land. And that's all our goals are. Those are our two foundation principles.
They're terrorists, they're criminals, and there's nothing to negotiate with them. Our position is that's deeded land. It belongs to the James Cattle Company, and by virtue of them occupying it, they're interfering with the lawful use and operation of that property.
People of British Columbia be the judge whether those who occupy illegally private land and then shoot at police officers at sight and hunt them and actually aggressively pursue them to kill, whether they're heroes or zeros. I think that's something people of British Columbia would judge. Some of them are saying, well, where is the other side of the story? And the police did not allow the other side of the story to come out. There is no other side of the story. There's only one side of the story.
They try to divide our people. They try to make us argue over status or off reserve or on reserve. And they do it successfully. But I tell you right now, these young people aren't going to allow that to happen. They're going to make that fundamental stand to change. They're going to make that fundamental stand for your children and all your grandchildren to have a place to live, to have a place to love, to have a place to be free.
The siege at Gustafsen Lake, British Columbia, in the summer of 1995, was the largest police operation in Canadian history. But was this police action really about enforcing the law, or was it in direct violation of both Canadian and international law?
Once we bring those out, whether we use them or not, we, for all intents and purposes, have engaged them in the war they said they want. And it'll set off the firestorm. So that's, unfortunately, if this takes us to that maximum, I think, and we can rationalize why we're doing this, because we're sensitive to that firestorm. And we've gone to the nth degree to avoid it. And this is how we bring it to an end. And it might not be pretty, but...
This confrontation culminated in the arrest of 18 defendants, who later had to endure lengthy and complex court proceedings.
What they are doing is forcing a confrontation which will force the Attorney General and the courts of this country, for the first time in its history for 100 years, to read the law and begin respecting it. And they're prepared to die for that principle, and for that, they're heroes, not terrorists.
During the course of this trial, was the ownership of the land in question thoroughly investigated? Was there equal justice under the law? Were violations of civil liberties, human rights, and international law
Somebody was
ignored?
Back in the bush taking shots. I had a newborn, so most of the time I was pretty close, staying close to the tent, and she was sleeping. All of a sudden I could shots started being fired, and I kind of felt helpless.
Was there political interference in the judicial process? Did politics play a major role in this event? Were defendants given a fair trial? Was the credibility of police incidents and statements seriously questioned?
We're looking at damage control here when things have to really go off the ground and people are going to get helpless. So,
Claimed excessive police force used to squash APEC demonstrations at the University of British Columbia in 1997, and more recently, the violent police response to a demonstration over Prime Minister Chrétien's appearance in Vancouver on December the 8th, 1998, give credence to the suggestion of key similarities to the 1995 police response at Gustafsen Lake. During the Gustafsen Lake trial, evidence emerged to support the existence of a coordinated smear campaign. The following footage depicts some of the participants and the procedures they used.
This guy now with a passion, and he is very enthusiastic about putting anything out there that is legitimate and professional and logical to show that this guy is a... We only want people that can help us then, right now.
These two can't.
Okay. Did you find somebody today that can help us with a disinformation or a smear campaign?
You know, there's evidence that was collected that on the government's part, there were things that they said didn't happen that happened. There were things that they said happened one way, and when you look at certain films, you see that they didn't happen the way that the government said that they did.
So the coordinated press releases that are the most advantageous to us can go out to the public. And by advantageous, that's things about Clark, things about the members here, and they also want to start profiling the hoods that are in there, putting in their, this is FPS so-and-so, here's his picture, here's what he's done, here's his record. They want to do that in a coordinated way to just bring this credit out there to these fucking guys, show them what they are through the press. And the OC's online with that. And they want to do it in a coordinated manner. What is it, the same thing?
Well, I'll tell you, it's goddamn near dead. I don't know who you're talking about.
Oh, good. RCMP showed news conference now. We did forward letter. Yep, right on. Jeez. When did you fax this?
Well, I wrote it at 2 o'clock.
Shit, we were out of our meeting. Good. Yeah, they want to show who's there and who the police are dealing with. Twofold effect. They're going to hear the news out there. Plus the public is going to see that we're not dealing with a bunch of 17-year-old natives with hunting rifles. That there's a serious threat here, and that's why we're not moving against it. By moving against it, you're going to need armaments, and people are going to get hurt. And they want to show what kind of characters these people are.
All the military and the police, all with guns, big guns, and the APCs, and, you know, just for 18 people. And there's hundreds of them out there. And, you know, there was 4 elders up there, and most of them were young.
I think they want to just see you give news conferences.
Smear campaigns are special.
If smear and disinformation campaigns are standard police practice and a specialty of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, as stated, then how can we be sure that any of the Gustafsen Lake news reports provided by the police to the press and broadcast publicly as fact were true? Throughout the Gustafsen Lake standoff, police made repeated public denials of military involvement, but were the military used?
This is an RCMP operational plan. It has always been an RCMP operational plan. It continues to be an RCMP operational plan. And there's nothing to this military rumor that we continue to hear. It's strictly an RCMP operational plan.
Contrary evidence has since emerged through court documents and police who videotaped many of their own internal meetings and statements.
Is this even a police operation? Like, at what point does the military click in?
This is just like your old army days anyway, for fuck's sake.
The direction we're getting is that it's perceived as nothing other than a police operation.
Here is John Splitting the Sky Hill, who has done extensive research into acclaimed political and military involvement at Gustafsen Lake.
The military who was reluctant to get involved in Gustafsen Lake because the War Measures Act was never officially proclaimed by the Prime Minister's office, nor was a national emergency ever declared by the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council of Canada. Yet unofficially, they all signed documents. The Prime Minister's office, through Louise Flechette, Jean Fournier, okayed the use of armored personal carriers, APCs and 50 caliber machine guns to be mounted on those APCs. In memos to the Department of National Defense through David Collinet, the police commissioner knew what was going on. The Privy Council, Romeo LeBlanc, knew what was going on. They all unofficially signed off to invade that camp, because if the rest of the Native nations within these unceded territories got clear definition that no land shall be ceded or expropriated in unceded Indian land unless a treaty, according to international constitutional law, had been fulfilled, that all indigenous people have the right to resist colonial encroachment in unceded Indian land. They knew it. They knew it. And yet, the political parties, the liberal parties in Ottawa, the NDP parties provincially, they all knew. They knew what we were standing on. And they all knew that we had a right to defend that territory. They all knew that the media would buy their lies and turn people against us, that grow in solidarity. They knew it. And they were willing to utilize the RCMP to kill. They were willing to move 400 RCMP into position to commit genocide, a mass slaughter. If that's not police brutality, and if that is not fascism in Canada, then my name is not splitting this country.
War, Canada, Native people, and the government of British Columbia, unbelievable. It's the same thing that happened at Waco. I can't say it's not without precedent. At Waco, they sent in armored personnel carriers, 13 altogether. They had a much bigger situation in Waco.
Shocking new evidence has been uncovered which implicates the police, politicians, and courts in a sophisticated conspiracy to deprive Native people of their rights, according to Canadian and international law. Was relevant evidence necessary for a just court decision suppressed or manipulated by the judiciary in such a manner as to create predetermined guilty verdicts? What influenced the selection of Judge Josephson, who presided over the Gustafsen Lake trial? To answer this question, we spoke with Dr. Bruce Clark shortly after he was released from jail and while confined by ankle bracelet to a home in Burnaby, British Columbia.
There's a bit of a hand-picking of judges that goes on for a political trial like this. The judge who was chosen, who was one who was sort of a charming, self-effacing, mild-mannered individual, that sort of demeanor, but hand-picked because he would not be an individual who would break rank. And the picking really would be done by essentially two judges, one Brian Williams, who was my adversary on September the 12th, 1995, when he was a lawyer in the Delgamuukw case in the Supreme Court of Canada, at which time he was just the most appalling of barefaced liars. And as soon as that case was over, he was elevated from being a lawyer to being Chief Justice of the trial bench in British Columbia as his reward. He replaced, his predecessor was Chief Justice Alan McEachin, who had been Chief Justice of the Trial Division, but he was raised to Chief Justice of the British Columbia courts, of all courts. So those two would pick their candidate to judge this trial of some political significance. Whereas Mr. Williams, as he then was, is a consummate liar, I mean, just the classic opportunist. Chief Justice McEachin is just a classic 19th century out-and-out racist. The basis for his decision in the leading case here in Canada, Delgamuukw, versus the Attorney General of British Columbia, was an adoption of Thomas Hobbes' statement in Leviathan in 1640 that savages, the lives of primitive people were nasty, brutish, and short. And that on this ground, Chief Justice McEachin held that the natives did not have a legal system capable of being recognized and capable of competing with the non-native legal system.
Was this really a political trial, controlled by racist judges and influenced by bigoted politicians? News reports at the time, quoting statements made by politicians and police spokesmen, indicated that this standoff was simply a law and order matter in which guns were used by criminals and terrorists. Here is George Wool, who represented one of the Gustafsen Lake defendants. We asked him if politics was a factor in this trial.
No question in my mind. In fact, this was so political that it's you know, I suppose you can look at it from this way. Look, when the Attorney General, who is the chief law enforcement officer in the province, engages himself on camera, flies to the scene after it's all over in an RCMP jet, and then there's commentaries made by politicians throughout, I mean, it's such a political event that it's remarkable that these people actually were able to go through a trial. I think, you know, when the jury, and look, let's face it, the record will show that the jury found many people guilty of mischief, common mischief, things that most courts deal with by way of fine and probation. And so when you look at the facts as presented, or at least the alleged facts as presented by the authorities, including the politicians at the beginning, and when you look at the eventual result, you see there's a big difference. And the only answer you can put in there, the only thing that makes sense, is that this was a political incident. It was politics from the day it started and politically to the end of the trial.
Once they come out of the package, there's a war. Like the media, it will be a war. We don't have to start the engines or do anything. If they're seen here, the perception has to be that we're going in, there's going to be body bags, and the perception inside will be exactly that. If they have a siege mentality now, it's going to be a death mentality if we bring them out of the package. Like the risk is just awesome. So we have to try to plan around that. When we deploy, essentially it has to be deployment to take it down. And that's I think we're, at the command level, we're in agreement with that.
The RCMP can definitely say that we have received 100% cooperation and support from the Attorney General of British Columbia.
Here are some excerpts from a 1997 interview we conducted with John Schaefer, a radio journalist familiar with the sovereignty struggle in British Columbia.
I think it's very important for people to realize the grotesque conflict of interest between an Attorney General who is also the Minister of Human Rights. It's a preposterous conflict of interest, and it revealed itself during Gustafsen Lake when we found that in fact there was virtually no reaction from the civil liberties human rights network in this province. They simply didn't activate. While we had the letters of support coming from all over the world, we had people like ex-U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, we had organizations like Incomindios, all manner of international support. Here, domestically, there was none.
Waco and Oka and all that shit out of this thing. Well, just to encourage no. John, do you have that human rights thing there? I want to show it to Mike. I've got it. Let's get going. What do you think of this? What do you think of that kind of crap?
We've now seen the trial over, and we still don't have any kind of reaction from the domestic human rights movement. The Canadian Human Rights Commission, nothing. BC Civil Liberties Union, nothing. I find that very disturbing. Most people are aware of, now, starting to become aware of the involvement of the Army, certainly the police, and some of the things that happen. One of the things that's also important in this case is to remember that this is a resource-based province. There are billions and billions of dollars of real estate and resources involved here. The large corporate law firms that have dominated the political and economic landscape here for some time are also factors. You have a law firm, for instance, Russell and Dumoulin, which is the law firm from which the Chief Justice of this province, Alan McEachern, comes from. That law firm is itself, Russell and Dumoulin, based in BC, in turn part of a national and international law partnership. What we saw, for instance, was with one of the very large land claims cases in BC, a land claim involving 25,000 square kilometers, I believe, of unceded Gitxsan territory, was that you had this preposterous situation whereby the Chief Justice of this province sat on a case in which most of the lawyers representing both levels of government came from his law firm, Russell and Dumoulin. Now, while you may think that was bizarre, what was more bizarre is that nobody said anything about it at the time. The powers that be, the academics that I spoke about, certainly knew what was going on here. Nobody said anything. Nobody said, is it appropriate that the Chief Justice sit on a case at which most of the lawyers representing the government are his former partners and associates? Is that not a conflict of interest? Well, it isn't a conflict of interest in BC because that is the interest. There is no conflict. You have a law firm by the name of Ladner Downs. Ladner Downs is itself part of a national partnership called Osler Renault Ladner. This is a law firm in which the Prime Minister is a senior partner. This is also a law firm at which Lyle James engaged, apparently, we understand, to handle his business and was, in fact, advising Mr. James in the lead up to the standoff.
At the beginning of the Gustafsen Lake standoff, RCMP were involved only as outside observers. The police readily acknowledged that they had no right to be involved in this dispute. So how did they become involved? And in such a major way? The record shows that it was after the police introduction of criminalization through alleged terrorist acts that their presence was not seriously questioned. Why, how, and when did a native land dispute escalate into a major police and military operation? We were able to locate native RCMP Constable Bob Woods, who acted as spokesperson, negotiator, and peacekeeper at Gustafsen Lake before the arrival of the emergency response team. He was able to keep the peace all summer during many confrontations. Let's listen to his statements about what happened after the Sundance and the circumstances surrounding the involvement of the emergency response team.
I personally believe, because of my personal involvement, that yes, it could have been settled without the involvement of the emergency response team. There was myself, Constable Charlie Andrew, and Constable Geordie Finley were the 3 native officers that spent 2 months in Gustafsen Lake prior to the ERT team involvement. And we firmly believe that it was at the point where it would have just dissipated by itself. The natives would have ended up just leaving the camp because the Sundance was in fact over. Okay, so for the 2 months, what my job became, and Constable Andrews' job and Geordie Finley's job, was our job became that of liaison, of negotiator, peacekeeper, and we made daily patrols, daily, nightly, day and night. We were driving in and out of that camp, checking on the natives, number 1, to make sure there was no problems or concerns with them. Number 2, there was campers out of Gustafsen Lake. We'd check with the campers, make sure there was no problems between the natives and the campers, and vice versa. And just basically negotiators and peacekeepers. And that was the air, and they accepted us. And as I say, once the Sundance was over, we still made the patrols in and checked on the individuals that were left. And in reality, it was down to, I believe, 5 individuals, all we counted in camp, when we gave the information to our staff sergeant that it's over, they're going to leave.
Constable Wood's statements have been verified through court disclosures and testimony. If this dispute was under control and almost everyone had left the camp, then why did the ERT become involved? Why was there such an enormous show of force, deployment of personnel, and monetary expense for just removing Percy Rosette and his family from their home?
The RCMP made up their mind that they were going to go in, they were going to use force. It didn't matter what I said, it didn't matter what the other constables said, they were going to use force. And they, plain and simple, no longer wanted the native members involved. Somebody above the level of constable made a decision that the ERT was going in, and nothing was going to change their mind. They were going to go in and put on a show of force to set an example.
How could this police action be justified? How could public consent be obtained? The record shows that the RCMP courted the media so successfully that news reporters religiously quoted police accounts as fact. Police strategy appears to have included the portrayal of the defendants as hardened criminals, convicted murderers, and dangerous hoods.
And we were there for 2 months, and I guess that's what makes me kind of laugh, is the story that Montague gives, is that we were pulled out for our safety. My God, we were in there for 2 months, daily. So I don't know what his reasoning is. After 2 months, all of a sudden it became dangerous.
Here is Count Henning Graf von Platen. Many of the defendants and their associates stayed at his guest house near 100 Mile House during the standoff.
In my immediate environment, other than in my family, who was part of this whole affair, because we had all these so-called criminals, trespassers, attempted murderers, with the exception of those who were in jail, we had them in our house, and we were delighted to have them here. They had their gatherings here, they met with Bruce Clark, and they came without Bruce Clark, and they waited here prior to going to the next court session, and so on. Delightful people, every single one of them.
Very important that the public were aware, raise aware, of this very, very dangerous situation which exists in this area.
Emphasizing a danger that was non-existent, according to other first-hand observers, enabled the police to acquire an impressive arsenal of weapons and equipment. Documents released during the trial show that Deputy Commissioner Farrell, commanding officer of E Division of the RCMP in Vancouver, British Columbia, requested the aid of the Canadian Forces and the use of their armoured personnel carriers through the Ministry of the Attorney General. Authorization came through the offices of then Solicitor General Herb Gray to British Columbia Attorney General Eugile Dzange, in which he states, "Thank you for your letter of August the 25th, 1995, requesting my assistance in obtaining the support of the Department of National Defence. I have discussed the matter with the Honourable David Colonet, who has advised that D&D will provide the resources. On August the 24th, it was reported that a police helicopter was shot at by camp occupants. However, during the court trial, the actual helicopter pilot, Sergeant Gerald Greening, testified that he wouldn't be willing to swear that the helicopter he was flying on this date was shot at by camp occupants. August the 26th press reports stated that a family camping in the area was terrorized as recently as last week by occupants from the camp wearing camouflage clothing. No camouflage clothing was ever retrieved from the camp. At the time, dozens of emergency response team members surrounding the camp were dressed in camouflage. The alleged violence of August the 27th became known as a suburban incident. Here was the official version.
We'll give you an accurate version of what we can tell you at this time. At approximately 1450 hours today, 4 of our members, 3 ERT team members and 1 dogmaster, escorted 3 forestry workers to a location on the logging road approximately 1.4 kilometers from Gustafsen Lake. The purpose of the patrol was to clear 2 large trees which had been felled by the camp occupants in order to restrict police patrols. While the forestry workers worked on the trees, the dogmaster observed a yellow dog in the forest. The dogmaster gave the order to evacuate. 2 ERT members were successful in escorting the forestry people in leaving the area. The other 2 ERT members had to back the vehicle up in order to get it turned around. And as they were backing up, they encountered a crossfire from semi-automatic weapons. The members continued to back up, taking rounds through the back of the vehicle, which knocked out windows, pierced the gas tank, and blew out the tires. The members continued to back up the disabled vehicle and attempted to return fire in a random manner in attempts to keep the fires at bay. After backing up the disabled vehicle approximately 2 kilometers, the danger of leaking gas and hot metal required the members to abandon the vehicle and run a considerable distance down the road before being assisted by their team members. When the members encountered the crossfire, they were both hit in the back. Their vest saved them from serious injury and/or death. One of our members has severe bruising where he was hit with and the other member retrieved a hot slug from between his belt and his bare skin where he received a minor burn from the slug. Both members are well and have received medical clearance. The RCMP's operational plan with respect to dealing with this matter continues to progress and advance, and of course other considerations are being taken as a result of today's shootings.
Here is the unofficial version we did not hear. The 2 alleged victims describe events to other police officers.
As he was going backwards down the road, serpentining. Either it serpentined where the guy could go whack, whack, right, and one of them through the window, and then he went and they're straight through everything. He looked like he was directly behind him at whack, whack, by the line of sight. That they go right through the back window, through the seat, through the silent patrolman, through the seat, and into him.
No, I was going to say that we kept it fairly straight on that roadway, because I don't think we were serpentining too bad, because that was that was the one thing that I was kind of amazed at, driving backwards at that kind of speed, but firing over my arm like this. I'm doing this to Gordy, so Gordy's leaned back and Gordy's doing one of these, and then we started taking rounds from both sides. I said, Gordy, I'm hit.
Because I said I'm hit, and you said so am I. Yeah. So I mean, it was very close. Like, I said, Jen, I got hit, and you said so have I. And then initially, I wasn't sure whether you were saying, yeah, I know we have.
Well, he just said I got a sore back, so I do that. I'm 44 years old, for Christ's sakes.
Is it possible for anyone to shoot in the manner described while driving in reverse? Forensic evidence suggests a 9mm was used in the alleged assault. No 9mm was ever found in the camp. An MP5 machine gun fires 9mm shells. Constable Mollendijk, one of the alleged victims, was in possession of such a gun at the time.
Fire was returned by Mollendijk and Rocky towards the encampment site.
Rocky returned,
Yeah,
he was driving.
he was firing over, he was firing out there too.
Mm-hmm. So we could have some dead fucking terrorists.
Dan? No, we don't.
Not that lucky.
The bullets were whistling through the goddamn trees, and that's what really got them in the car. They stuck their guns out the window and started firing to get away, and then that's when the bullets started coming through the truck.
And there are some people that think it is all staged, and it's all...
Like you say, the best answer sometimes is just don't dignify it.
I think that we should say that we're not going to dignify those accusations with a response. We've given you our response. You see anything wrong with that one? By saying that we're not going to dignify their questions with any answers regarding what happened out there in the shootout. We have given you our position on the 27th of August. There is no change.
That's what you need to do. And you can reiterate, we are now surrounding an armed camp. Doesn't that speak for itself? The more you say, the more it looks like you're
And then if we show the vest in the pictures, then someone's going to question, oh yeah, sure, well anybody could have done that.
You could have done that on the range, which we have done before in the past. We've shot at vests.
But not with people.
Well,
no.
Hmm?
No, with people.
No, but we have shot
Couldn't get a
at
volunteer.
I couldn't get a volunteer.
Nobody in internal would come forward.
Yeah.
What happened to the promised investigation? How could crossfire penetrate directly through the rear doors? Why would ERT members drive straight towards gunfire? What about ballistics reports? Were contradictions ever researched?
That is, those two, that is their lines. We know that for sure. Yeah. We have no problems with, that's why we've left those two in.
And I'm not going to be telling anything about you figures. What was the, does this fit with your ambush scenario and so on. We're not going to be discussing that. Trajectories and stuff, that is way down the road. You guys got lots more work to do before we can start talking about that. Are you comfortable with that? Very. Okay.
On August the 31st, 1995, Bruce Clark was finally allowed inside the camp. He later emerged with physical evidence and an affidavit stating that his ballistic evidence proved that police fired directly at camp occupants and that it was the police who had declared war on the natives.
I, Trond Halley, freelance camera person of the City of Vancouver in the province of British Columbia, make oath and say, 1. Exhibit A hereto is a 223 casing which can be fired out of an M16 assault rifle, such as is issued to the police tactical units. 2. There is no weapon at the Gustafsen Lake Indian encampment that is capable of firing a 223 shell. 3. Exhibit A was found on the road after a police tactical unit officer fired his rifle directly at persons from the said encampment.
And I think the OC's on side. He's really pissed off with, not with the operation the way it's gone. I think everybody's generally pleased. He's really mad about this fucking slight to the native people. And this much. Yeah, and it's got his dander up enough that he wants to kill this Clark and spear the prick, and everybody that's associated with him. And there'd be no holds barred. Yeah.
Just as should the charge that Bruce Clark should be sent for a mental examination. A judge knows what that means. He knows that he's accusing that person of being possibly mentally incompetent. And he never could have believed that. No one believed that. The Attorney General didn't believe that. He's trying to tell the world, hey, this guy may be crazy, you know. What a despicable act.
On September the 5th, 1995, according to a press report given by Sergeant John Ward, referring to events of September the 4th, 4 officers came under fire from armed natives at the Gustafsen Lake camp. Shots were fired, and a number are thought to have struck our vehicle. The officers were actively pursued by persons from the armed camp, and only great restraint on the part of our officers prevented a very serious incident. 4 military APCs were sent in to extract the men to safety. Now listen to what John Splitting the Sky Hill says concerning this same event.
September the 4th, the RCMP stated that an ambush happened in the evening. Natives stalked them late at night. They came under fire. And as they come under fire, they were terrorized by these natives firing down on them. They only could get hunkered down and try to return fire. The forensic expert that came to court during the time of the trial over here reported that not one bullet had penetrated the Suburban on September the 4th. That the dent that was in the mirror, that dent was made by a tree branch. But in the meantime, the night before, operations commanders Glenn Olfert, Rick Hall, Ken Gates, Earl Moulton had made contact with General Otting, General Meading, General Chichester, David Collinet, the Attorney General of this province, the former Solicitor General of Canada, Herb Gray, Krebs, Ernie Quantz, Stephen Owens, all sat down and conspired to falsify documentation to the military, saying that one of their members narrowly escaped being killed that evening because they found a .22 caliber slug inside the headrest of the Suburban. But their own forensic experts said there wasn't a bullet in the Suburban.
The press version of this incident mentioned the words actively pursuing. Does this next clip actually portray how the RCMP created this report?
It became apparent that our members were under surveillance by unknown persons. Oh, you want to use surveillance as opposed to, because you're going to have to have a reason for deploying these things, and if it's just under surveillance, then
I think they were hunting, or they're pretty aggressive. I don't know what you call it.
This is it.
I think it's pretty inflammatory.
Yes. Actively
Pursuing?
Yeah,
Actively pursuing. Yeah, that's good. Actively pursuing our police officers, okay? That's good. Yeah, I went down here.
Here is a letter signed by Inspector Moulton, Superintendent Olfert, and Superintendent Hall. It contains a statement: "We have this AM, September the 6th, 1995, recovered a .22 slug from the headliner of the Victoria ERT Suburban. That bullet narrowly missed the head of the Victoria team leader." This letter concluded with what could be construed as a threat to the military, stating, "The command structure, now located at 100 Mile House, advises that they will be forced to withdraw the current 1120 and 1029 checkpoints should the APCs be formally designated as being unable to assist."
Any major problems as far as this little operation went? I won't bore you with the details about how we got these machines in here today. It'll be a story to tell over a drink of rum.
But I can assure you that we're going to manage information, and I don't give a shit what the cost is. It's going to be done. If we have to hire people to do it, and we're full clerical staff from other functions, it don't matter a hell of a lot at this stage. We have to get a handle on information.
Was this false report of a shooting simply a repeat of the alleged Suburban shooting of August the 27th, 1995, which was also apparently used to put pressure on the military to provide armoured personnel carriers?
My name is Corporal Bud Mercer, Regimental Number 33489. I'm a member of the Vancouver Headquarters Emergency Response Team. On the 11th of September, 1995, at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the headquarters team was in a position to the west of the red pickup truck which is behind me. Our duties on that day were to disable a red pickup which had been causing us some problems running up and down the road. We were assisted by EDU in placing explosive charges on the road, whose job it was to disable the vehicle when it passed by that certain point. The charges had been put out the night before, in the early evening on the 10th of September. On that day at approximately 1:45, we were given a heads up that that red vehicle was in fact eastbound on what we refer to as Lion or Lakeshore Drive. Once the vehicle reached this point, the explosives were detonated by a remote wired triggering device in the trees. That was done by Sergeant Al Armstrong. The wiring from the explosives ran right through these trees. In fact, here's the wiring where the detonator was attached to. The wire from here was between these two trees and runs simply straight in a straight line back to the explosive device. This is where Sergeant Al Armstrong was lying in a prone position to protect himself with the detonator. At a predetermined point, the detonator was activated, causing the explosives to go off.
It's easy to create hatred, you know. It's easy to divide. It's sadly even easy to kick Indian people around. We've been doing it forever, haven't we, since we first got here? By we, I mean the Europeans. But there ought to be an end to it. We ought to aspire to something better.
Last night I spoke to the major in charge that put his 4 members in. And it's fairly typical anytime we do work with the military. They're pretty impressed with the caliber of people we stick in and the quickness with which our guys picked up on. Like they were doing stuff. It's normally a 5-week course, and we've already, by noon, they'd already gone the first week.
We're gonna know tonight whether they feel they can drive them, period. And we're also gonna know whether they feel they can drive them by such and such a day.
Oh, no, yeah. They will be able to tell you this afternoon, yes, this is feasible, and we are very confident of doing it. And we can, by tonight, tomorrow morning, and they will give us a timeline of when they will do it.
Okay, and the other thing, of course, I guess is I know what the man has said and I know what he's done, but when push comes to shove, are those things leaving the base until this is cleared through channels or not?
Mervyn Council the city this morning, 10 o'clock, they're hearing it.
I can't answer that.
Be 10 o'clock their time, so they're done.
Because the meeting was recorded and the whole 9 yards, they're very formal.
We had NEOC involved and NEOC's involved. Yep. Our meeting with all the top dogs down from our outfit to
In the military, I think almost every officer's been briefed now in detail, like where they encountered the place and all that stuff. Like they've all seem to know the whole story.
General from Edmonton. I could make the call. What we want to do. Brief them on what we want to do. But he's gone. So that's where it was at.
According to Sergeant Peter Montague, it was reported that on September the 11th, 1995, a camp truck knowingly violated a no-go zone and was subsequently disabled by an early warning device. 2 or 3 armed natives then ran from the truck, firing semi-automatic weapons at RCMP officers, which sparked a gun battle lasting nearly 2 hours, during which hundreds of rounds were fired. Crown disclosures, trial evidence, and Wescam video surveillance footage taken by Wescam at 6,000 to 8,000 feet have shown that this police statement was false. Here we can see a note scribbled on Assistant Commissioner Dennis Brown's notes, which appears to indicate that this bombing incident was taped accidentally. Is this also why no video footage was available for the suburban shooting? Constable Kevin Mann, who was the officer in charge at the scene and the first to approach the destroyed truck, testified that the first shots fired on September the 11th, 1995, were fired by the RCMP, and the occupants of the truck never fired upon himself or his team members. Constable S.H. Arthur testified that he saw two occupants running from the truck and that neither were carrying weapons. He also testified that he fired upon the unarmed occupants of the truck as they were leaving a lake with their hands in the air and within what was supposed to be a guaranteed safe zone. Constable Malcolm Callender testified that on the morning of September the 12th, 1995, he was manning a sniper's position when he spotted a man walking from the camp towards the lake. He testified, Constable O'Gorman took the first shot, which hit at the man's feet. O'Gorman took another shot before he handed the rifle to Corporal Whiten, who took another shot. Callender learned an hour later that the shots were fired into the claimed safe zone.
A shot was taken, and pretty clear the shot was intended to kill. Now, that, you see, you have to sort of wonder, question this, is the RCMP made no news announcement about that. This was just a failed shot, and it's only by, you know, the probably the fortunes of the wind or the luck that there wasn't a dead body. Consider then what the situation would be. I mean, I think the RCMP are just lucky that that this wasn't, that somebody in the RCMP isn't on trial over that issue. The so-called mischief was on approximately anywhere between 10 and 20 acres on the extreme edge of a 14,000 acre ranch in the middle of the wilderness. In other words, you'd get lost trying to find Gustafsen Lake, or at least there's a caution sign when you leave, because it's not much wilderness. Now you tell me if that's justice. And you see it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the next thing you know, there's a military campaign. It's not a police operation. It became a military campaign.
I find it sad, as an ordinary Canadian, to see that in spite of all the expenses, financial and otherwise, in the standoff itself, millions and millions, plus the extremely expensive long trial, the general public doesn't have any idea what this was all for and why, politically, legally, and so on. And I think this should be understood by all the Canadians, or maybe even by the entire world, because it is an unsolved problem.
Lake Gustafsen is a part of a worldwide struggle to save indigenous peoples before it's too late. And it's very, very late. And we ought to be doing everything we can to uplift the Indian peoples of British Columbia and all of Canada.
Because the understanding of the issues of ownership of land in British Columbia means that you, for example, right now, interviewing a so-called Canadian on his piece of property, you are not sitting on my property, you are sitting on the property of a Shuswap Indian tribe, because I was not told what appears to be the truth, namely that this land is not owned by the real estate agent or by Farmer Jones. It is still owned by the Indian people because they have never sold it.
We ought to recognize Gustafsen Lake for what it really is. There are 200 million indigenous people on the earth, a multitude. They're the most endangered of the human species. every place they live. And they live every place, you know. We think, well, they're only in a few places. They're every place. They're always the people who were there first, or at least before the present major population came. And these 200 million people are struggling for survival. They are, without question, the most spiritual people on the planet. I believe that all people create equal, but they have never been away from their roots. They have never divorced nature. They have lived in harmony with nature, or they have died. We have a lot to learn about that. We are at war with nature, just as we've been at war with the Indians. What's a judgment in Ottawa, or a judgment in The Hague, where the International Court of Justice sits, or a judgment before some new tribunal, even a judgment in Vancouver, I mean, if the people are still on your backs. It means more of the same. So the major struggle has to be for fundamental change in human attitudes. And that has to come from the simple truth. And the simple truth is that we need to learn from and love our native people. They've got so much to teach us. We owe them so much for all that we've done to them. Our own souls depend upon us wanting and struggling to help them.
We asked Wolverine how many women and children were in the camp at the time of the Gustafsen siege.
It was about 6 men. The rest, women and children. So really, we don't pose a threat. So I think the only threat that is because we're doing our sermons. I believe they want to stop that. When we were at the Sundance ground, we brought out, we danced for the women and the children, for the pain and the suffering should end, must end for them. This is what we were dancing for.
Some of the most soul-touching pieces of music that I have ever experienced was Native American chants. And I had a chance to do music for a movie that was produced and directed by Native Americans Benjamin and Peter Bratt. And I got to listen to some of the Native American music that was so spiritual that we had to turn the lights out in the studio just to record this music. So that is what touched my heart. That is what made me realize that those were the voices of my ancestors. Those were the, and the people, every Native American that I have met so far has been the humblest. It's very humble, true-hearted people. And that is why I want to be a part of this, because we all basically were given breath by the same breath maker, and we are all brothers, and we are all sisters. And the sooner we all want for each other's children what we want for our own, that's when we'll have peace on it.
Would later be passed. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last. All the times they are changing. it's time